The first time anybody in Pinewood Hollow saw Silas Grimwood, he was standing at the edge of Widow Mackey's property, with a leather satchel so full of money that bills were practically spilling out the sides. This was back in 1987, when $100 bill was still something you'd only see once in a blue moon, if ever. But Silas had them stacked like playing cards. "I'd like to buy this land," he told the widow, his voice soft as creek water over smooth stones. Widow Mackey, who'd been trying to sell that rocky 20 acres for near about a decade, just about fell off her porch. "Well, I reckon we can talk terms," she said, steadying herself against the rail. "I'll pay cash," Silas said. "Double what you're asking." Now, that should have been the end of it. A simple transaction, good fortune for a woman who'd had precious little of it. But when Silas reached into that satchel and pulled out a stack of crisp hundreds, his hand started shaking something terrible. His face went white as January snow, and sweat beaded up on his forehead despite the cool October air. "I can't," he whispered, shoving the money back into the bag like it had burned him. "I'm sorry, I can't." He turned and walked away, leaving Widow Mackey standing there with her mouth hanging open, watching him disappear into the tree line like a ghost that had lost its way. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Silas Grimwood became the talk of every porch, diner, and church gathering in 3 counties. He'd moved into the old Pritchard cabin up on Sourwood Mountain, paid the rent 6 months in advance, folks said, though nobody could confirm it because old man Pritchard wasn't talking. The cabin had been empty since Pritchard's son died in Vietnam, and it was about as humble a dwelling as you could find. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a roof that leaked when the wind blew from the north. Strange choice for a man who clearly had money to burn. Silas kept to himself, mostly, but every few days he'd come down the mountain and into town. He'd stand outside Harmon's General Store, studying the window displays like a hungry child looking at Christmas candy. Sometimes he'd go inside, walk the aisles, pick up items, a bag of coffee, a warm coat, a set of kitchen pots, and carry them to the counter. But when it came time to pay, that same terrible shaking would overtake him. He'd set the items down, mumble an apology, and leave. "It's the damnedest thing," Dale Harmon told his wife after the 3rd or 4th time it happened. "Man's clearly got money. I seen the bulge in his coat pocket, but he can't seem to part with it." "Maybe he's just peculiar," Emma Harmon suggested. "Lord knows we get our share of peculiar folks passing through." But Silas Grimwood wasn't just passing through. He stayed. And the longer he stayed, the more folks noticed. He'd offer to pay children for doing chores, then stand there frozen when they finished, unable to hand over the promised $1. He'd try to tip at the diner, but his hand would lock up before the money touched the counter. He attempted to buy firewood from Tommy Bledsoe and ended up splitting the whole cord himself instead, working till his hands bled because he couldn't complete the transaction. The frustration on his face during these moments was terrible to witness. It wasn't meanness or stinginess. Anybody could see that. It was something deeper, darker, like a man trapped inside his own skin. Sarah Beth Crawford was the one who finally got close enough to ask. She was 17 that year, smart as a whip and curious about everything. Her daddy ran the hardware store, and she'd been working the counter since she was tall enough to see over it. When Silas came in one afternoon, looking longingly at a set of carpentry tools, Sarah Beth decided she'd had enough of watching folks whisper and wonder. Those are good tools, she said, coming to stand beside him. My granddaddy had that same set, built half the houses in this hollow with them. Silas nodded, but didn't speak. You fixing to do some building? Sarah Beth asked. I'd like to, Silas said quietly. That cabin needs work. Needs a lot of things. Well, these'd do you right. You want me to box them up? That's when it happened. That terrible transformation Sarah Beth had heard about, but never seen. Silas's face contorted, his breathing went shallow, and his whole body began to tremble. His hand went to his pocket, where everyone knew he kept a fat roll of bills. But it was like watching a man try to move through molasses. His fingers curled and uncurled, unable to complete the simple act of retrieving his money. I can't, he gasped. God help me, I can't. Sarah Beth, to her credit, didn't laugh or back away. Instead, she pulled up a stool and sat down, calm as Sunday morning. Can't or won't? Can't. The word came out like a confession. I want to. Lord knows I want to, but I can't spend a single cent of my own money. Haven't been able to for near about 15 years. There it was. The truth laid bare. Sarah Beth considered this, her sharp mind working through the implications. That's a powerful curse, she said finally. If you don't mind me saying. Silas let out a bitter laugh. That's exactly what it is. Over the next hour, in the quiet of the hardware store, Silas Grimwood told Sarah Beth Crawford a story that would have sounded like pure fiction if it hadn't been for the obvious torment on his face. He'd grown up in eastern Kentucky, Silas said, poorer than a church mouse. His daddy had died in the mines when Silas was just 8, and his mama took in washing to keep them fed. They lived in a company house that leaked and shook when the coal trains passed, and Silas wore the same pair of shoes from 6th grade until he graduated high school, stuffing newspaper in them when the soles wore through. But Silas was smart and determined. He got a scholarship to the University of Kentucky, worked 3 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, and graduated with a degree in finance. By the time he was 30, he was working on Wall Street, making more money in a month than his mama had seen in her entire life, and it went straight to his head. I became someone I didn't recognize, Silas said, staring at his hands. I stepped over people, used them, threw folks away when they weren't useful anymore. There was a man, Jacob Hensley, who'd been my mentor, helped me get my first real job. When he got sick, lost a step, I went to the partners and suggested they let him go. Recommended they cut his pension too, said he hadn't earned it. Silas's voice cracked. They listened to me and Jacob. He had a daughter with medical bills, a wife who needed care. Losing that pension destroyed them. He came to my office one time, begged me to help him, to at least speak up for him. And I had security remove him, Sarah Beth. Listened without judgment, the way her grandmother had taught her to listen, with her whole heart. 3 months later, Jacob Hensley was dead, Silas continued. Heart attack, the doctors said. But I knew better. I'd killed him sure as if I'd pulled a trigger. And that's when she came. Who came? Jacob's mother. Silas looked up, and Sarah Beth saw tears in his eyes. She was this tiny old woman from up in the hills. She'd traveled all the way to New York City, took a bus for 2 days to look me in the eye, and she said, his voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said, You got money now, Silas Grimwood. You got all the money you ever wanted, but you'll never spend a cent of it on yourself. You'll carry it around like chains, wanting what it can buy, but never having it. Maybe then you'll understand what you did to my son. And it came true, Sarah Beth said softly. That very day, I went to buy lunch and I couldn't do it. Tried to pay my rent, couldn't. Tried to buy clothes, groceries, anything, and my body just wouldn't let me. I thought I was having a breakdown. Saw doctors, therapists, specialists. Nobody could explain it. But the money kept coming. My salary, my investments, all piling up. I just couldn't touch it. He pulled out his wallet, fat with bills. I can earn it. I can carry it. I can even give it to other people, though that's harder than you'd think when you're trying. But spend it on myself, on anything that would make my own life better. Can't be done. Word of Silas's curse spread through Pinewood Hollow like smoke through trees. Reactions were mixed. Some folks thought it was justice, a rich man getting his comeuppance. Others felt sympathy, seeing a man genuinely tortured by his past. A few thought the whole thing was an elaborate con, though they couldn't figure what the angle might be. But Sarah Beth Crawford, she started thinking. She came back to the hardware store the next day and found Silas sitting on the bench outside, watching the world go by, with the saddest expression she'd ever seen. I got an idea, she said. You can give money away, right? To other people? If they're in immediate need, yes. If I'm directly handing it to them for their use. But it's difficult. The curse fights me even then. But you can do it. Sometimes. Why? Sarah Beth sat down beside him. Because there's a lot of need in this hollow, Mr. Grimwood. More than you probably know. We got families where the daddy's out of work because the furniture factory closed. We got kids who need winter coats and elderly folks who can't afford their medicines. We got roofs that leak and cars that won't run and 100 other things that money could fix. Silas looked at her sharply. You think I should give it all away? I think maybe that's how you break the curse. By using that money the way you should have used your power when you had it, to help folks instead of hurt them. It wasn't easy. The curse fought him every step of the way. When Silas tried to give Widow Mackey money for her land, intending to deed it right back to her as a gift, his hand seized up so bad he dropped the cash in the mud. When he attempted to pay for new shoes for the Breslin kids, whose daddy had black lung, he got such a powerful headache he couldn't see straight for an hour. But he kept trying. Sarah Beth became his partner in the endeavor. She'd identify families in need, and Silas would work through the physical and psychological torment of giving away his money. They developed strategies. Sometimes he could manage it if he closed his eyes. Sometimes if he gave the money to Sarah Beth first and she gave it to the family. The curse's grip was weaker. Sometimes he'd have to spend hours psyching himself up, reliving the memory of Jacob Hensley's face, forcing himself to push through the paralysis. It was like watching a man do physical therapy after a stroke, relearning basic movements through sheer determination. Slowly, painfully, Silas Grimwood began giving away his fortune. He paid off the mortgage on the church. He funded a scholarship at the high school in Jacob Hensley's name. He bought winter coats for every child in the county who needed one. He paid medical bills and car repairs and property taxes. He hired men to work on community projects, rebuilding the playground, fixing the community center roof, paying them wages that seemed almost too generous. But he said he wanted to do it right. The more he gave, the easier it became. The curse's grip loosened, degree by degree. Silas started looking healthier, younger somehow. The lines of pain on his face smoothed out. He smiled occasionally, tentative little smiles that seemed to surprise him. and Pinewood Hollow began to change too. The hardware store started thriving again because people had money to fix their homes. The diner hired another waitress because business picked up. Children showed up to school with new backpacks and supplies. The whole community seemed to lift, like morning fog burning off a valley. 2 years after Silas Crimwood first appeared in Pinewood Hollow, Sarah Beth Crawford graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. She'd been accepted to college with a full scholarship, one that Silas had tried to fund but couldn't, since it would have been too directly tied to helping himself through his connection to her. She applied for and won it on her own merit instead, which pleased them both. At her graduation party, held in the newly renovated community center, Silas pulled her aside. "I want to show you something," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single dollar bill. With only a slight tremor in his hand, he walked to the concession stand and bought himself a cup of coffee. Sarah Beth's eyes went wide. "You did it. You broke the curse." "Not completely," Silas said, taking a sip of the coffee with a look of profound satisfaction. "But it's weaker. I can buy small things now, necessities. I tried to buy myself a fancy dinner last week in Asheville, and the curse came back strong. I think," he paused, considering, "I think maybe it'll always be with me in some way. A reminder. But I can live now. Actually live, not just exist." "You did a good thing here," Sarah Beth said. "You know that, right? You changed this whole community." Silas shook his head. "The money changed things. I was just the vehicle. And honestly, Sarah Beth, I'm grateful for it. The curse, I mean, as terrible as it was, it made me face what I'd become. It gave me a chance to be someone different." He looked around the room at the families gathered, many of whom he'd helped in one way or another. "I spent years chasing money, thinking it would make me somebody. Then I had all the money I could want and couldn't touch it. Now, I got just enough to get by, and I'm richer than I ever was in New York." "You staying in Pinewood Hollow?" Sarah Beth asked. "If folks'll have me, I've grown fond of that leaky cabin. Thought I might fix it up proper if I can manage it without the curse kicking in. Maybe do some carpentry work for folks. I was thinking about those tools in your daddy's store." Sarah Beth grinned. "I think we can work something out." Sarah Beth went off to college that fall, but she came home for every holiday and summer. Each time she returned, she noticed small changes. Silas had indeed fixed up the Pritchard cabin, doing most of the work himself, trading labor with neighbors for materials. He'd started a small carpentry business, making furniture that he sold for modest prices, just enough to live on, nothing fancy. The curse never fully left him. He still couldn't buy luxury items or spend money frivolously on himself. Once, on a dare from Tommy Bledsoe, he tried to buy an expensive watch, and he ended up on his knees in the parking lot, shaking like he'd been struck by lightning. But he could cover his basic needs: food, utilities, simple clothes, tools for his work. "It's enough," he told Sarah Beth during one of her visits home. "More than enough." By the time Sarah Beth finished college and graduate school, becoming a social worker who specialized in rural community development, Silas Crimwood was simply part of a Pinewood Hollow's landscape. He was the quiet man who made beautiful furniture, who'd show up when someone needed help fixing a roof or building a shed, who always seemed to have a little extra money when times got hard for someone. Some of the younger folks didn't even know his story, but the older generation remembered, and they'd tell it sometimes, on front porches or around fires like a parable. There was a man once who couldn't spend his own money, they'd say. Richest poor man you ever saw, and it either destroyed him or saved him, depending on how you look at it. On Sarah Beth's 30th birthday, Silas gave her a rocking chair he'd made, black walnut with oak accents, sanded so smooth it felt like silk. It was the most beautiful piece of furniture she'd ever seen. "I can't accept this," she protested. "You could sell this for—" "I made it for you," Silas interrupted gently. "That's different. I can give gifts now if they're made with my own hands. The curse allows that, encourages it even." Sarah Beth ran her hand over the armrest. "You ever think about Jacob Hensley's mother? Wonder if she's still alive?" "Every day," Silas said. "I tried to find her, years ago, wanted to apologize, to tell her I understood what she'd done for me. But she'd passed, went peacefully in her sleep about 6 months after she cursed me. I'm sorry. Don't be. I think maybe she knew what she was doing, knew exactly how long the curse needed to set before it could start to heal me." He smiled. "I like to think she's at peace, knowing her son's memory is honored here. That scholarship sent 3 kids to college, now all studying to help people." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Sarah Beth rocking in her new chair, Silas whittling a piece of cedar. "You ever regret it?" Sarah Beth asked finally. "Leaving New York, all that money and power?" Silas looked up at the mountains surrounding the hollow, purple in the evening light. "Not once," he said. "I thought money would make me free. Turns out being unable to spend it was what actually set me free." He went back to his whittling, and Sarah Beth kept rocking, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called out its lonely song. Years later, when folks would ask Sarah Beth Crawford about the mysterious rich man who came to Pinewood Hollow, she'd smile and tell them he wasn't mysterious at all. He was just a man who'd learned, the hardest way possible, that wealth means nothing if you can't give it away, and that the richest life is one lived in service to others. And if they pressed her about the curse, whether it was real or just a story, she'd think about all the times she'd watched Silas Crimwood shake and sweat and fight against invisible chains, all the nights he'd sat up wrestling with demons only he could see, all the small victories and setbacks on his journey toward redemption. Real as the mountains, she'd say, and just as unmovable. But mountains can be climbed, one step at a time. Then she'd offer them a seat in her black walnut rocking chair, and she'd tell them about the real treasure of Pinewood Hollow. Not the money that came and went, but the community that learned to lift each other up, one small act of kindness at a time. And somewhere, up on Sourwood Mountain, in a cabin that no longer leaked, Silas Crimwood would be at his workbench, making something beautiful with his scarred hands, humming an old hymn his mama used to sing, finally at peace with the curse that saved his soul.